Alright, so today we're going to be talking about what the best rubber boots are for hunters and outdoorsmen. I'm from the very wet state of Maine, and the rubber boot is the boot of choice for the Maine outdoors. The synthetic type boots and the leather type boots just get saturated and start to get your feet wet over time. Growing up hunting since I was just a little kid with rubber boots. I'm also a wetland scientist, that's what I do for work, and so I'm in the wetlands every day during the field season. From my work, I'm walking like 5 to 10 miles per day, 5-6 days a week, so I'm looking for something that can really keep my feet in good shape so I can continue to work day in and day out without getting blisters, without my feet getting wet, without the boots breaking down on me. So I need something durable because I'm going through the thickest prickly bush type stuff you can imagine. Like when you're hunting, you can kind of avoid some of that, but if there's a wetland in a certain area, I have to go in and get it, and I might have to be walking through dense shrubs and prickly bushes for all day sometimes. So I've got a variety of boots here that we'll talk about. Some of them are mine, some of them are friends, some of them are family. I've been able to use them all a little bit, so I'm just going to give you my thoughts on why I think some of these boots are good and why I think some of these boots are bad. So we'll jump into my longest standing favorite boot. I have worn these boots pretty much every year, probably going on 10 years, maybe more. But last year was the first year that I didn't wear these, and we'll get into the other boots that I wore. But these are the Lacrosse Grange boots, and there's a few reasons that make these boots better than most other rubber boots. And the first is that they have a pretty, like your foot sits low in the boot, and there's not a lot of sole to them. Your foot has a low center of gravity when it's in the boot, and that keeps your ankle from rolling. So they're really good for side hilling because you're not going to roll your ankle like you will in some of those boots with a thicker sole on them. Another thing that I like about the boot is the type of rubber that it is. It feels a little bit plasticky, which makes sense because a lot of these rubber boots aren't made out of full rubber. They're mixed with fillers like clay and plastic a lot of times, and it does feel like it's got that plasticky feel mixed in with that rubber, but it gives that rubber kind of a harder feel. And so what that does is that it keeps prickly bushes from really damaging these. They'll either glide off, or if they do bite into that rubber at all, it'll just tear the prickles out. The prickly bushes aren't going to like dig into the rubber and then drag really, and then create like a tear. So the rubber on this boot does hold up very well, and especially for how thin the rubber is of this boot, it's very thin, very malleable. The whole thing is like you can twist it and do all kinds of stuff to this boot, and so it kind of just feels like you're putting on a pair of socks. And they're super lightweight. They're one of the most lightweight rubber boots out there. That's good because for a couple reasons. One, it helps to prevent like your knees. My knees will get sore if I have too heavy of a rubber boot on, so it keeps my knees in good condition because they're so light. And it also keeps it so that way your heel stays in the heel pocket and it doesn't slide up and down, which causes those heel blisters. Because if you have a heavy boot, especially like a heavy back to a boot, every time your foot rolls forward, your heel will pop up and rub back and forth on the back of the boot, causing that blister. But since these are so lightweight, your heel really stays in that heel pocket. It also has a tight ankle to it. They're designed that way, and that it just further keeps your foot down into the bottom of the boot without causing blisters. And I never get blisters when I wear these boots, and since they're so malleable, they're very comfortable. You don't really notice them when they're on your like shin or anything. They just kind of form with your leg when you're bending your leg and your foot. The only downside with these boots, in my opinion, is the sole. These are basically brand new boots, and there's just no traction on the bottom of them. They don't come with any traction, which is a pro and a con, because when you don't have very much traction, you can feel the environment underneath your foot, so they're good for hunting because you can be more stealthy. But I do think they could still add more traction and be pretty much just as stealthy. So you're slipping around a lot on snow, especially going uphill on snow. Wet leaves, dry leaves, climbing up mountains with wet leaves and dry leaves, I should say. But you'll learn what you can do with these boots. You'll know where to place your feet so you don't slip, and you'll know what you can get away with when you're wearing these boots before your boots start to slip from underneath you. But I just wish they had a little bit more traction there. And they don't have a lot of support on the bottom of your boot, so I find that the bottoms of my feet could feel a little bit more tired at the end of the day than compared to some of these other boots. But overall, for the price, one of the top boots you can buy for comfort. I will say that everybody's feet are different, and some bigger people I found don't like these boots as much. They don't, the rubber's kind of thin, and they like having a thicker rubber to kind of hold their ankle in place. They might be more of like a narrow boot, so if you have big calves and wide feet, you might not like these as much either. Another thing with these boots is longevity. So because they're kind of a high clay or plastic content, they'll start to crack after a couple years. They're very durable for, I would say, 2 years, but around that 2-year mark where sticks and stuff have started to rub against the rubber, that rubber becomes thin and it also starts to crack a little bit, because over time just these high plastic content rubber boots, they start to crack, and you can put a stick through these boots when that happens. So they won't last forever, but when you buy them brand new, they're very strong and they're very durable. But most of the boots, if not all of the boots in this review, don't last very long anyway. Even if they're still working at year 3, the sole is usually worn down even more, and they're just kind of bald, even more bald than they already are. So I just end up replacing them. They're only $100, so it's a really good deal for what you get. For me, these work really well, and I'm probably going to compare these boots as like being the gold standard to what all these other boots will kind of be compared to. So I actually have a ton of these boots, just older ones, might be helpful to look at. So here's a really old one. I like looking at these because you can really tell where the wear marks are on them. So this is what I was talking about. You can see the wear here. It comes around over the top, and then you can see it here too. And then the toe cap, you can see the toe cap gets worn down pretty good too. And this rubber protective area gets worn right off of them. And so those are the areas that I'm talking about where it's starting to get thin, and that's when sticks can start to go in there and puncture those thin areas after years of use. And you can even see the rubber start to separate when they get old, especially on those like flexion points of the boot and where the wear is occurring. So it's kind of cool where you can kind of see where the branches and thorns kind of do the most damage, and then it'll be important to have a boot that can withstand abrasion in those areas. So the next boot is the boot that I wore last year. I've worn these for a whole year now, and they're the ones that replaced the Granges for me last year. First time in years and years that I went away from the Grange boots. And what I went to was these GumLeaf Field Wellies. I heard really good things about them. They're made out of a high rubber content, and what that means is they're supposed to last a lot longer before they start cracking. A lot of people will say like the soles will wear out before the rubber will start cracking, and so that was a very big reason why I wanted to buy these and test them out, because if they could last longer than the Granges, that's just a huge selling point for me, so I don't have to buy new boots every 2 years or so. And the next big selling point for me, which was the biggest selling point probably, was they have a nice Vibram sole on them, and it's also super flexible just like the Granges, if not even more flexible. And it's pretty soft, so you can feel the environment under your foot really well. Although it looks like it might be a little bit higher, the footbed might be higher. It's basically the exact same once you get your foot down in there as the Granges, so you have that low center of gravity. Side hilling with these is fine. They have more traction going uphill and downhill, especially in the snow and on leaves and muck and stuff like that. After a year of using these, that sole was definitely noticeable. My feet were way less fatigued at the end of the day. Big fan of the comfort of this boot. The only downside of this boot is that this high content rubber boot is more soft and supple than like this more plasticky rubber. You can really feel it. A drawback to that is, although it's more comfortable, it is not as tough. Branches and twigs and going through a really thick brush seems to be fine. It'll leave a little bit of like marks on the boot, but not a big deal. But it's the prickly bushes that these boots really struggle with. Like I was saying, for my job, I have to go through the thickest and prickliest areas. I can't walk around like most people can if they're hunting or just walking the dog outside or whatever you're doing. What I noticed was that these boots get kind of chewed up when you do that. I put a couple of good scratches on them, deep scratches. They didn't leak, they weren't leaking scratches, but I put some Aqua Seal on those. I actually covered the entire toe cap with Aqua Seal just to further protect the boots, because like I showed you on my older Lacrosse Grange boots, the toe cap takes a lot of abrasion, so this just helps with that, and that's worked really well. Up in here, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. There's definitely a couple thorns that have taken pieces out of the rubber there, but nothing to be too worried about. I did just notice the other day that I have a pretty good hole in the back of the boots here. It didn't go all the way through. It looks like it went all the way through the rubber though, and it's just the lining on the inside. So I'm gonna have to patch that. Definitely not the most durable, but very comfortable, and we'll probably keep using these over the Grange boots going forward. If I was just using these for hunting and doing my outdoor hobbies, I think these boots would last a lot longer because I wouldn't be just barging through prickly bushes and stuff like that. Yeah, I'd be going through some prickly bushes, but not nearly the same extent as work. Alright, I'm back with a scale so we can weigh these boots. So we'll start with, we'll just do one boot. Start with the Granges, 1,050. And then we'll do the GumLeaf Field Wellies. These have a built-in liner, which is, I wish they didn't, so I could put in a wool liner if I wanted to, but it's still fine. And these are 1,080, so very close, almost identical in weight to the Lacrosse Grange boots. And the height is, they're just a little bit shorter than the Granges. You know, they're probably a 1/4 inch shorter. So that brings me to another boot here. These are, I don't even know how you pronounce these. These are my dad's boots, Les Chameau, maybe. They're just a super expensive, supposedly super durable, another high content rubber boot. They're still in great condition. He's probably had these for, I don't know, 5 years or longer, but he never wears them, and it's because they're so heavy. That's the downside with these boots. They've got a pretty rugged sole on them, and it does have that, since they're that higher content rubber, it does feel like they would be a more fragile type of rubber, more supple, easy to puncture with prickly bushes. It's probably just because he hasn't really worn these because they're so heavy that that they don't have any marks on them. But we'll weigh these real quick. So these are 1,418 grams, around 400 grams, 350, 400 grams more than the last two boots that we looked at. And that's mostly due to the leather inside, I think. Otherwise, they'd probably be more comparable to the Field Wellies. But they have this, like, gusset, I think it's called, where you can unzip them. And it's still waterproof, so it just makes it easy to get them on and off, and you can open them up so they breathe a little bit so they can dry out faster. For me, that's not really important. I have a boot dryer, and that does the trick, and I can slip my rubber boots on and off just fine. It seems like they have a thicker sole to them, so they have a little bit higher center of gravity, so that makes side hilling a little tricky because you're more apt to roll your ankle, and you're also, with that weight, your heel is coming up and down in that heel pocket, and that can cause blistering. I've worn these around a little bit and I wasn't too impressed with them. And they do make other boots, I was actually on their website today, that do look more comparable to the GumLeaf Field Wellies. So I'm sure you can get different types of boots, but if this is more if you're looking for that specific type of boot with a leather liner in it, that one specifically is just super heavy and not what I would recommend. Next pair of boots are also my dad's. These are the Bog Arcatas or Bog Arcatas. Not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but these are probably the most comfortable rubber boot that I've ever put on. They're also extremely lightweight. They're only 15 inches, so the rest of these boots are right about at that 18-inch mark. These boots are 15, so they're 3 inches shorter. Have a very, I wouldn't say rugged, but it's a very deeply grooved sole, but it's still very soft and very malleable, just like the Granges and the GumLeaf Field Wellies. Very lightweight. We'll weigh them right now. 916 grams. You just put these on and they feel like socks. The sole seems like it's kind of big when you look at it, but your foot really does sit down far. These boots seem like they would be fine for side hilling because of how far down your foot sits in them. And specifically, I think they'd be great for tracking deer in snow. If you follow my channel at all, you'll know that I track deer in snow. I don't necessarily think you need an 18-inch tall boot for that, but I think you could walk, you know, a couple hundred yards up or down river and find a spot to cross. So the 15-inch boot I don't think is a deal breaker for that. Plus they're lighter so your feet don't get as fatigued. They've got better traction than at least the Granges. They do seem like they might even be better than the GumLeaf Field Wellies. The only thing about these boots I could see being a problem for me is that the neoprene kind of starts in the, bring out one of my used Granges. You can see the wear marks on these boots, although this does provide some protection because this lip comes up a little higher. I think these corners here would get hit with abrasion from sticks and stuff, and so this part right here I'd be a little bit worried about. But up north, when I'm tracking deer, they don't have the same kind of nasty vegetation like you do down south in the more developed areas where there's more invasive species that are usually way more prickly. It's usually just raspberries up north. So I think these boots would work just fine. So that's what I'm really buying them for, is to test them out for tracking. And by looking at these boots, he's had these for over 2 years now. They seem to be in pretty good condition, but at the flex point on the corner of this boot, it's separated. He says he hasn't noticed it leaking yet. He didn't even notice this until I brought it up, but he says that it's not leaking. It could be a boot that, you know, you get a year, maybe 2 out of, and then you got to replace them. He's had them for going on 3 years now, so that's a pretty good sign. He wears them quite often, like walking the dog and stuff, but this one is just starting to open up, but I wouldn't think that one would leak over there. So the flexion points, a little questionable. The inside of these boots, they do say, so they're neoprene lined, I guess is the deal with these. And it says Neotech 5mm neoprene, good up to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a comfort rating, which doesn't mean you can sit down, you can just sit in a tree stand and your feet will be warm down to -40. That usually means like you're going to be walking around in them, so you can walk in these up to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. But I mean, they seem a bit thin to be walking around in -40, so I don't know about that rating. But it doesn't really get to -40 in Maine, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm sure these would be good, like tracking deer in the snow. The Grange boots are good down, as long as I'm walking down to 0 to -10. I've worn the Granges and they were fine. Although once I start slowing up, I've got to put hand warmers in those. I could see them being a little bit warmer than the Grange boots. Yeah, great little, super comfortable, lightweight little boot. These are the Lacrosse Burley boots, Burley air grips. So these are foam insulated, so it's just light insulation. 1,200 grams is basically what these are. And these have grips on the bottom of them that are supposed to help in the snow, mud, and in the wet leaves. And I bought these like for tracking as well, just to, if I was like in more hilly country, they work better than the Grange boots. The only downside is that they're a little bit heavier, but they're also better in colder conditions too. So when you have to slow down, when you know you're getting close to a buck, having a little bit of insulation is nice. Kind of depends on the day, where I'm at, what I decide to wear into the woods when I'm tracking. If it's a warmer day, I'll probably throw on the Grange boots, especially in flatter country. But if it's going to be a little bit more hilly, I might throw these Burley boots on. And these lasted me 4 years. Well, I have the old pair here. I turned them into some slippers, but the bottoms of them, they get worn down over time. They're probably like 3/4 of the way worn down to the sole, whereas these are pretty new, very new. The nubs on them are much higher, so once these start to get worn down, they start to get more slippery, so gotta replace them over time. I wear the Grange boots every day for work, but these boots I didn't really wear for work because by the time these boots came out, the wetlands were frozen over, so there wasn't much outdoor work to do. They were mainly just used for hunting, so they lasted me a lot longer, pretty much twice as long. So I got 4 years out of these versus the 2 years that I usually get out of Grange boots. They are a little bit bottom heavy. I was worried that my heel might come up and down and cause some issues with blistering, and it definitely does a little bit more. I'm usually wearing thicker socks though when I wear this more insulated boot and during the colder weather, so that seems to take care of the issue. And it's also just like the Grange, it's got a tighter ankle to it, so it keeps your foot more locked down in the bottom of the boot. So I found that to be very helpful. And also another thing that I haven't mentioned yet is when it's very flexible rubber, so the top of the boot is basically the same as the Lacrosse Grange boots. Super thin, but it's still durable, but very flexible. Down here it's got that foam in it, so it's a little bit less flexible, but still very flexible. And when you have a boot that's flexible like that, it also helps to keep your heel down in the boot, because if it's a hard type of plastic, which some of these boots are, we'll get to it, it's stiffer. And when it's stiff like that, then when you bend your foot, your heel tends to pop up in the back. But if it's very easy to bend here, then your heel is going to stay much better down in the bottom of the boot. So I think that's why these boots, I think, are very comfortable, and I like them a lot. So the next boot that we'll talk about is a new boot purchase that I just made. These are the Baffin Titans. The idea behind buying these is to be the ultimate cold weather boot. It's a Canadian company. They make these boots that are supposed to be super warm. I think it's down to negative 160 degrees Fahrenheit. At least negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit was the comfort rating. So that means you can walk around and your feet should stay warm down to that temp. And they're a pack boot, so they have this removable insulated liner in them. Let's see if I can get it out. You can feel it there's like insulation in that liner. It's very fluffy to the touch. So makes me feel like they're gonna work well. Oh, it's kind of interesting. They actually throw in a little example of what's in the liner. So they have this little disc that shows you exactly what the liner is made out of. I'm sure you can get multiple of these and you can keep buying them, and if one gets wet you can just replace it with a new one. But they're also scent free because they're made out of rubber, so they should be a good option for hunting, which is why I got them for hunting, tree stand hunting in the really cold weather, but also to keep my scent to a minimum. But the weird thing about these boots is this liner is kind of tight. Like, these boots are size 14s, and I'm usually a size 11, but I had to get a size 14 because your toes kind of feel cramped when you get them down into this insulation. And rule number one is to make sure you have space for your feet to like move around, and that space keeps them warm. And granted, they feel a little bit tight at the tips, but it is just insulation, so you can still wiggle your toes and you'll push against the insulation and it'll be squishy, so it's not like my toe is being cramped by the actual boot, it's being kind of cramped by the insulation. So I had to get a size 14 to minimize that as much as possible. They still feel a tiny bit cramped, but we'll see. If it's just insulation that's kind of making my toes feel cramped, then there might still be plenty of space in there that it won't bother my toes. The rubber it's a very tacky, like sticky rubber all the way through it. It feels like a very high content rubber boot, almost even more rubbery than the high content rubber boots. They have extra reinforcement, it looks like, in the toe area, pretty much the whole bottom of the boot, and then it goes up here, which is perfect because, like I showed you on the wear and tear of my Lacrosse Grange boots, this has protection pretty much in all that area, which is great, but I'm not planning to be walking around very far with these, maybe like a mile into a tree stand, but they're not going to be the most comfortable to walk in just because they're so big and gaumy. And they have really good tread on them. They have a place you can tighten the tops of the boots to keep the warmth in there and keep snow from getting down in your boot. Which is a little noisy, but not the end of the world, and I'll probably just end up throwing my pant leg over those. But yeah, overall excited to try these boots out. The size 14 is pretty crazy. It's a big boot. It's a lot of boot. 1,875, but that's to be expected because these are a size 14 with a big old liner in them. All right, so the next boot is another new purchase. I might return these boots actually, but a lot of people wear these boots, so I thought it would be good to have them in the review. These are the Lacrosse Alphaburley Pros, and they weigh 1,280. These weigh 80 grams more than the Burley Air Grips, both Lacrosse. Based on what I'm finding with these boots is they have a stiffer sole on them. It's a nice sole, like it's good traction, looks like it's got good traction. Definitely stiffer though. Like when you put your foot in there, it feels like it's a little high up. Feels like there could be a little bit of ankle rolling going on when you're side hilling. And because it's stiff, my heel is popping up in the back of these boots. And also the like little extra protective rubber piece that goes along the boot here. It's right at the flexion point of my shin. And I can feel that kind of dig into the front of my shin a little bit. People with bigger, heavier legs, I think, tend to like this boot because it's a little bit more rigid. Like, it's got a little bit more ankle support. The rubber is thicker too, I would say. They are uninsulated, but it just feels like a harder boot. Like the plastic is just a little bit thicker, and when you put your foot in there, I feel like it's a little bit more stabilized, especially for someone with a bigger foot who's able to like take up more space of the boot, so it's a little bit more snug and their heels might not pop out as easy. When you break these boots in and you get a little bit of a crease going on the sole where it's stiff, maybe that becomes easier, and then your heel popping out of the pocket isn't as bad. But for me, I'm not going to get these boots. They just don't feel very comfortable. And they also have this neoprene at the very top, which helps to cut down on weight. Probably why they did that, but I don't really like neoprene, especially on my work boots for doing like scouting and any of that type of stuff. I like to have a full rubber boot because that neoprene will just get chewed up. But I could see why some people would like these boots, especially with bigger legs, but they're just not the boot for me. So the next boot I have here is a friend of mine's. These are the Muck Boot Fieldblazers, which are a pretty common boot you can find in stores. And they have, you know, maybe a little bit better traction than the Lacrosse Grange boots, but not too much more. They're a neoprene boot. You can see there's actually a hole started, and I don't think they're leaking yet, but there's a hole in the neoprene already. And you can just tell they're more of like a plasticky type rubber. It's a very stiff rubber. And whenever there's stiff rubber that's made out of a high clay plastic filler content, when those flexion points crease repeatedly with each step that you take, it just seems like that plastic starts to separate and split. Now looking at these boots, I don't see that yet, but that's just been my experience with other boots that are stiff like that, like the, what are they called? I can't think of the name, but there's other boots that have stiff rubber like this, but it's also just not super comfortable to have such a stiff rubber boot. And like I said, that's going to be popping the heel out of the heel pocket when it's such a hard rubber like that. And that neoprene doesn't have a lot of like protection in the area where I get most of my wear from sticks and stuff. That neoprene's going to get pretty chewed up for me. So definitely wouldn't be a work boot. For tracking, they just don't have much more tread than the Lacrosse Grange boots. I don't see these benefiting me in any way, and they're still pretty heavy. 960 grams. They're a little bit lighter than the 18-inch boots, but they're pretty heavy for a 15-inch boot. I think that the Bog Arcatas are a much better choice. They're definitely much more comfortable. I've worn the Muck Boots around, and they're not nearly as comfortable as the Arcatas are. That is all the boots that I have with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.